Wow. That was absolutely terrific from Pier, Paolo, Mucelli, giving us the overview, if you like, 5 different models, lots of players and competitors. And you can see that this is not some fringe, marginal activity, but is absolutely playing right to the core of corporate workspace with some of the corporates' big players and very different models. From the hub, which is an ecosystem, as Indy describes it, growing organically, 100% locally owned. I like your analogy, Indy, that it's not like a Starbucks rollout, which means you probably pay some tax in your local territory. And of course, Regus, co-working is not just for corporates. So a very, very interesting and fascinating field. I'm going to throw it open immediately to the floor. You've got 4 early adopters, pioneer players in this field. Right. Question there, Melanie. If we could bring the mics round. Again, if you could say who you are and where you're from, and who your question is aimed at.
Melanie Walcott from Orbit Architects. I think it's probably to all of you. I'm interested to know, what are the age groups of the people that are using these spaces? Harping on to Jerry's point, is it the millenniums? Is it Generation Y? Is it the baby boomers? What age group of people are using these start-up and transient workplaces?
May I start? Well, it's very simple. 20 to 60.
Right. Yeah.
The average in my center, the average 30s and 40s.
I would agree. It's exactly the same. The youngest is around 22. We've actually had one person who dropped in, he was 19 for a bit, who's starting a business, who was sort of quite inspirational, all the way through to a guy who's delighted, who's in his mid-60s at the moment.
Yeah, exactly the same.
60 is the new 40, I have to tell you that.
Nothing against 70 years old.
Julia, what's the profile?
Exactly the same.
Okay.
I don't know what the perception would have been, but it's a really varied age group.
Okay.
Also, if you go to East London, you will see that the majority of independent co-working spaces tend to focus on the startup community, tech community, a lot of developers. Definitely the age group there is 20s, early 30s. So it really depends.
Okay. Next question. We're not all stumped. No, we're not. Primo.
I'm wondering if you have, are big corporations coming in and using these spaces? I know they do in the Valley. There's several places where a big corporation will take a whole unit out and let them work in the co-working environment. I wonder if you've had experience with that. That's to everybody.
Yes. Hopefully we sort of talked a little bit about that in the presentation, but I think we're also seeing with the corporates that they're actually taking a mixture of space. So because traditionally, I suppose, serviced offices were kind of dedicated space, office space, what we're seeing now is that they might take a small amount of that, but then the rest of the people, then they will use the flexible co-working space in addition to the fixed space. And so it's a real mix of different space types.
And for us, it's something we're hoping to see. We've only really had one space up until the couple more that we're opening at the moment this month, and we think that with that network, it suddenly becomes much more interesting for larger companies to suddenly come in and have bases all over London instead of just in one place. So that's something we're really hoping to see over the next month or so.
At eOffice, larger corporates tend to use the conference facilities, conference and meeting rooms, not so much the open plan co-working space.
Okay.
We tend to get a lot. We've got about 3 corporates that have outsourced their innovation teams into there. That's what we have seen a lot of trends of. Like similarly as was being discussed, we've also seen a lot. Unilever were in the other day. McKinsey bring in some of their clients are now bringing in some of their clients. But we have got a particular focus on social and social change, and as well as social as a different form of venturing, a different form of doing business. So we are seeing those particular. We want those sort of interactions with corporates, and that we create a natural bias. But yes, increasingly many corporates, and also very large. We've got one of the largest healthcare providers right now investing in startups, 7 startups in the middle of Westminster. So we're seeing different forms of engagement with corporates, a little bit more pluralistic.
Can I just pick up on the rather intriguing, tantalising idea that Stuart threw in, just as you have bring your own device, where people are given a budget to buy their own IT. Can we foresee a future where corporates are giving their own employees a budget to buy their own workspace? And if so, how is this going to evolve, and what are your particular business models gearing up for that? How are you going to catalyse that?
I'm happy to
Yeah.
give an example. Actually, we had a meeting recently, and certainly one of the things, I think, more and more organisations perhaps have a mixture. Some people are employees. They also have people working for them that are freelance and effectively self-employed, and they want to actually offer the same opportunities in the way that they work to all of them. So one way of doing that is actually to allow people to effectively run everything on their own budget, use their own credit card or whatever it is. And what we're able to do is actually to use the software to create single reporting on the whole company, whilst billing the individuals for their space and how they use it. So I think that is something that we'll see as people are actually using a mixture of employees and outsourced resource.
But doesn't the once you allow employees to outsource to decide their own space, doesn't that undermine one of the most fundamental principles of the corporation, which was the co-location under the roof of one employer?
I think it has to be in conjunction with, you absolutely need a company head office, whether for everyone to sort of potentially come together, but as a collaboration space. I think it depends on the actual work that's happening. When you're looking at that individual work, we've talked about it, we've heard time and time again, people saying when they're in that space, that Julie's example earlier, you've got people tapping on the shoulder, distracting you the whole time, and actually for a lot of that individual work, you need to be somewhere else, and you might do that much better at home, you might do that much better in a Regus lounge, in a coffee shop, or in potentially a co-working space, and maybe that freedom for that part of the time should be there, and it's a value for the company that their employees are working better in that environment too.
Can I just throw this open to the floor? I mean, how many people in corporates are operating schemes now where people can buy their own space? Is there anybody that's contemplating it? No? Okay. Yes, gentleman at the back there. Do you want to talk about that at all? Yeah? Can you? Yeah?
Hi, Jonathan English, Deutsche Bank. Not part of the real estate group, so my real estate colleagues might not know about this. But it has been done. In conjunction with Regus, we have a relationship with them around a completely different program around meeting space. But colleagues in some technology projects have actually done a bring your own office, for example. So they have built project offices and technology offices outside of the main workplaces to get projects done where office space wasn't available to bring them together.
Okay, thank you.
Was that on an individual level, or was that on a group level with the whole team coming together?
It was an individual orchestrated it, but it was bringing a team together, yes.
Fine, yeah, absolutely.
It was an agile development team.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jeremy, would like to, I think there is one approach, which is to take the co-working office movement down a real estate pricing model. I actually think the real power, and what we're starting to see in, say, Bay Area and other places, if you talk to Brad from Hub Melbourne, he's saying he wants to change the charge-out rate for a Hub seat from $600 to $1,000. And that's not a real estate model. That's a value-added model. And I think the real estate model of actually pricing seats is not the future. I think it's actually the value-added aspects: access to talent, access to information, access to networks. And I think we're misunderstanding it if we assume it to be a real estate model. And Hub Melbourne is thought to be the gorilla of co-working in Australia, the £800 gorilla. And I think that's a smarter approach, and what we're starting to see is access to talent, job boards and other things, which we're getting through, which are far more powerful, and people want to be associated to it. So I see the physical co-working space as effectively a small touch point to a much broader, wider network. And I think that's the real functional value that will start to really drive the value on the real estate price. So the real estate is just a touch point. And I'm proposing that I think that's why I suppose I'm saying it's a co-working ecosystem, and the quality of that ecosystem is what you want to drive towards, as opposed to just the physical real estate model.
Okay.
I
There's
think,
yep.
potentially quite interesting though, how closely do you feel that those two things need to be linked? Do you think you could get to a point where actually that community element, which there's huge value in tapping in, does that actually always need to be in the physical space? I've actually got one example quite quickly of someone who who's moved into our space, who moved out of another co-working space simply because they picked up so much business from it that they were surrounded by their clients the whole time that they couldn't get any work done. So they actually moved into a space where they could actually maybe not try and pick up too much business. There's absolutely opportunities in our space to do that, but they just wanted to hide themselves away somewhere and actually get work done and then go back to the other place. And I'm just wondering if there could be maybe a disconnect between these two, potentially under the same thing.
And useful disconnect in a sense. But I suppose what I'm saying is that the functional value of the network is going to become, is where I suppose from the house perspective, where we're going to see a real value added. If you're going to go away from the real estate pricing model, which, we were just offered 30,000 square feet right in the heart of London for free.
Can we talk?
Yeah. I suppose, and the biggest impetus is business rates. So I just want us to move away from this notion the value added is going to be this real estate model. I think we'll have to move further along. That's why I suppose my provocation in this session is we've got to think about being the infra corporate and build that value chain into the model. In a way, just to sort of challenge us.
That's great. Back to our Marie, you had your hand up. Can we pass the mic? And then there are a couple of other questions over here as well. Yeah. Peter, yeah.
Yeah, like Pierre, last week I was at the conference in Paris on co-working. And as a large corporate organization, as is Johnson Controls, I didn't feel that the corporate world was so much welcome into co-working environment. And at that audience, we had the largest amount of owners of co-working spaces in Europe. So my question is, do you feel we're going to move towards two different types of model, a model of co-working environment for entrepreneurs and another model of co-working environment for corporate, or not?
Okay.
My view of the conference, if you see my slides, and by all means that was not a complete list, I feel the movement is very recent. And I would compare the co-working movement or trends comparable to the business center industry 25 years ago, when, in particular in the UK, the market was very fragmented and very unprofessional. And of course, Regus took advantage of that by professionalizing the service and expanding it, and in a very fast and international way. And I would think that there will be a number of co-working operators which will emerge and grow and provide a more professional service. Currently, I think most of the co-working spaces tend to focus on cheap space at the outskirts of the city. I mean, that happens in London, East London, or maybe South. It happens in Paris or in Berlin, where real estate is very cheap. I think eventually you will have more co-working spaces which are enlarging the offering to corporates or more established professionals. We are, for example, probably the most expensive co-working space in London, and many of our clients are not startups, actually more established professionals. I think you guys are going along the same road. So I think if you provide the quality of the environment, or the central location, quality of the environment, quality of the finishing, the furniture, the design, the high service level, and the provision of very stable and state-of-the-art technology, then you will be attracting, definitely you will be attracting corporate, not only the startup, but also more established and corporate. And that's why you see all these big telecom giants now that are looking into this space. Google, Mozilla's, Telefonica, and so forth.
I think just worth adding to that, we've obviously had the network for some time, and I'd like to say we are very welcoming to corporates, so please feel free to come and join us. But one thing that we've been working on is actually getting feedback from corporates over the last 18 months or so, and putting together a programme that we feel really does meet the needs of corporates, which perhaps we haven't had in the past. So called the Enterprise Programme, and it really is looking globally at how we can offer the type of workspace under the right sort of contract as well that corporates need to have. Because I think obviously, we've all got procurement teams in our organisations that want to look at how space, you can't get away from it, how it's procured, the value of it, and the type of contract that's entered into. And I think, we have to respect that and actually come up with something that delivers something that fits with the corporate environment. So that is something that we've been working on.
Okay. There was Peter Bossum, there was a question, and then we'll come to Philip Tidd of Gensler.
I'm interested in this word community that Mr. Johar brought up. It's a good word, community, and I like it. It seems to me that corporates are the very antithesis of that. You go in, it's secure, it's difficult to get into the places, and we've been doing some work speculating about what the space is. There's a lot of redundant space in corporate buildings at the moment. We've been speculating about what you might use those for. Had any of you considered moving your businesses in to the corporate buildings, and then, as it were, they become part of the community de facto because they are offering other things to the community, businesses, coffee shops, rather different to what they do normally? Just a speculation.
Anyone want to pick that up? Have you been offered any space by a corporate?
Yes.
Right, okay. Julia.
One of the things that we're looking at, I mentioned about doubling our locations over the next 5 years, and to do that, we've got to really sort of look at all the opportunities. So we've been talking to a number of corporates about their vacant space and how we can, either take it off them in a more traditional way in terms of a sublease, or equally to actually do some sort of profit share with them. So they've still got the flexibility to use that space and flex in and out of it as they need. And then the rest of the time, we will actually look at generating income from it and creating the type of space that we're discussing and do some sort of profit share with them. So that's very much a focus of our development programme.
Yeah, I suppose, yes, we have, but I think the more interesting part of that question for me is this idea of community. And I think the point about community is about culture. I think we're on a trajectory of moving away from management as a method of influence to culture. And culture is actually something that's grown and infused. So why a lot of people want to come to any one of our spaces is because they have an appropriate culture, or they have a culture that actually corporates want to aspire to or want to engage with. And I think that's what we're talking about. The power of co-working spaces in the culture that they grow and that they seed. The first 12 members we picked at the Hub for Hub Westminster were very particular because we wanted to seed a particular type of culture. And as we move away from management as a method of control to culture, the power of nudge and other influences in design and seeding of culture becomes much more important. So yes, but in a sense, there's a sort of business change process that I think these sort of environments and processes are part of. And we are working with lots of corporates, frankly, whether it's from local authorities who want to open up their procurement supply chains to effectively larger corporates who also, Cisco are in our building right now, working with us on telepresence at various other sites. And their people regularly pop in. I can name various people. So I think it's about culture, which is the value added. And I don't mean that in a flaky way. I mean that in a quite a designed way.
I mean, it could be that, as corporates outsource all kinds of things, they might outsource their own space, because a lot of companies are not expert in providing office space. They struggle with it. Yeah. And also, especially if you take the hub idea of an entire ecosystem and a knowledge exchange and a knowledge and a knowledge flow, we know from the KPMG presentation Sarah gave earlier, the resistance, the difficulties, the barriers. Maybe all of this will be outsourced to organizations which have professionalized the whole issue of the relationship between space and knowledge and IT. We could be moving into the post-corporate era, where if you look at the history of the corporation, it was about co-location under one roof and one employer. Maybe that's going to change. So, Philip Tidd. Philip, put your hands up. Can we have the mic for Philip? Yeah, he's asked a lot of questions. Yeah. Can we have the microphone, please, to Philip?
Yeah, hi. I just want to pick up on a point that one of you mentioned about the tech city in Shoreditch. I think there's a sort of a big misnomer at the moment, because all of the startup businesses in tech city are effectively being outpriced because real estate has got hold of what the real value is that they're sitting on. So they're all trying to move out now of that area because they can't afford to be there anymore. But you know, real estate does play an important part in this. You know, we're sitting in London where we have hundreds of companies sitting on millions of square meters of real estate, and for years they've been trying to, you know, effectively use less of it. So, Indy, question is kind of to you, really. You know, your example has got to be, if you measure the cost of the rental in the Westminster hub by person, probably the highest rent on the planet, because you have 22,000 people using whatever 1,000 square meters. And you know, a lot of corporate real estate and property departments have been trying to implement desk sharing, so that's got to be the highest desk sharing ratio ever, let's say. I think the question is, what would you do? How would you react if a very, very large corporate occupier came to you and said they wanted to outsource their entire portfolio to co-working environments?
As long as it wasn't the real estate people, I'd love it. And I don't mean that disingenuously. If it was a CEO and he wanted to talk about culture change and talk about transformation, yes, it would be great. And I don't mean that disingenuously, because I think if we see it as a problem of actually physical infrastructure, we misunderstand the problem. If we see it as a problem of actual culture and innovation, I think we see a completely different solution. So I'm being very particular about that. And I think we're going to see the whole change of facilities management and asset management go from just physical assets to your resource assets, which are your people. And these are going to be much more fundamentally linked and understood as technology, a geopresence technology, will start to do so many wonderful things that we're just beginning to start to play with. So I suppose as we start to talk about culture and physical, I think then I get interested, I suppose, just to be very particular about that. I mean, it'd be fascinating. It'd be one of the most interesting exercises we can do. And, you know, many corporates are starting to think about that stuff. So, yes, we'd be very much up for it.
Okay, time for a couple more questions before tea. Yeah, Jim Reed, Arab?
I just have a microphone already, actually, so... thank you. You've talked...
You bring your own microphone to these things, don't you?
Now you've got my trick, haven't you? All of you talked at length about the advantages, the benefits, the reasons why people go for co-working. I wonder if you could just share with us briefly some of the feedback you get from your customers, your tenants, on what you feel you could be doing better and what you see as new challenges, new demands from your customers coming down the line.
If I may start, a clear trend I see is in the provision of a very stable, fast, reliable internet and monitoring of the broadband or the internet, in particular to medium-sized tech companies, which is becoming a big issue. So I think it's a great opportunity. We are talking with a company in Silicon Valley that is expanding to Europe, and we're trying to see whether we can integrate the setup of, sorry if somebody's here from Cisco, of firewalls, switches, access points, with a monitoring system that allows to know at any point in time remotely who's, you know, what is the usage of each user, what application they're using, what devices, and give this tool available to the manager or to the person in charge for this particular company. So that's a growing trend. I think that's the most important service. One of the most important services we are providing is reliability of the internet nowadays. You have many clients with 3 devices now, coming to the office with 3 devices. And yeah.
I think from an IT point of view, we're lucky because our space is actually exist within flexible office buildings we've already got. So in a lot of them, we've got 2 gigabit lines coming in there. So we're actually set up for much larger companies in there already. So that hasn't been so much of an issue. But I think in terms of the space, it's something that's evolving constantly, and it's constant feedback from everyone. It's little bits and pieces that we're picking up in the design of the new buildings in terms of the different spaces that people need for different types of work. And I think a lot of people have come in, they've started to use the space in a very different way to the way they first thought, and it's just been picking up on that. So developing quieter areas and louder areas within that, looking at noise issues within the space for concentration, and it's bits like that that we're now putting in and retrofitting. And the community element as well, which we think is really important. We've just been trying to gauge exactly where everyone in the space actually wants that. They definitely want social interaction. They definitely want the ability to potentially work with each other and pick up business from that, and learn from each other as well. We're just trying to work out actually how that fits in. So we're working on an intranet system at the moment as well off the back of that to bring everyone together, not necessarily within the space, but they've got the ability to, through the intranet, connect with each other too.
Actually, we just did this with our members literally about 2 weeks ago. Talent services, so recruitment, PR, sort of financial services support. So we're seeing services being a big ask. Who's in the space, and being able to connect them. That seems to be, that's the core function, and that's, I think, an interesting evolution where they are looking for some of the kind of para-corporate or corporate infrastructure. Those were the key items that came up. Everything else I would second, or everything else the panel has said. Good internet, absolutely critical. I think we are going to see a lot of interesting information around geolocation of people in space. I think that will be one of the most intriguing events, like if who, what, where, when. You know, if somebody's in the space, give me a nudge, and various other things. So who is in the space is a very big act.
Obviously, I agree with everything that's been said. I think the 2 other things that are coming through from our corporate customers is actually locations that we struggle to get centres in. They're struggling, the developing world. So I think, you know, being in the right locations is a challenge in some countries. And then I think the other thing we're looking at now and being asked to look at is actually branding. Branding to the extent of the meeting rooms. So if people have a client meeting, they might only be for an hour, but how do we make it feel like it belongs to that company? And so we're looking at a lot of opportunities to do that, even though it's not actually their space. So I think that's what we're hearing from the corporates.
Okay, well, I think we could debate this a lot longer. It's an absolutely fascinating emergent area. Sadly, our time is out, and I'd just like to thank our panel, Julia Penfold of Regus, Indy Johar of the Hub, Stuart Whiting of ClubRooms, and Pier Paolo Mucelli of eOffice, 4 pioneers in this area. Thank you very much. It's time for tea.